the United Kingdom. We did not. You ask about the ideas that are in the white paper. In fact, ideas that are in the white paper, some of the ideas that are in the white paper that perhaps have caused most debate and discussion following the Chequers Agreement and the publication of the white paper were ideas that were set out as potential issues for us to look at in the Florence speech that I gave last September. There had been discussions about these throughout, and that was slightly fleshed out in the Mansion House speech that I gave earlier this year. So those proposals were there and were considered and looked at by ministers. We then decided the route that we were going to take, and we spent some time discussing that with the European Commission, and obviously in terms of the negotiations with the European Union. It became clear that that was not negotiable. Alongside that, of course, we were looking at the customs arrangements in relation to the two options that had originally been on the table, and then refining those two options to ensure that we could deliver on the frictionless trade at the border and the no border with Northern Ireland. What became clear was that it was necessary to evolve the Mansion House position, and in advance of that Cabinet meeting there was discussion about that particular issue. As I say, the underlying concept was one that had been previously discussed because it was there actually in the not Lancaster House, Florence, and then in the Mansion House speeches.
And the law officers? Did you ask them for their opinion in good time as required by the Ministerial Code, and what was their response?
Well, as I know, Sir William, you will know, we don't normally give in public details of law officers' opinions that are given to the government. But I can assure you that all those who needed to be involved in this and who needed to be to look at this from their responsibilities were involved.
And that did include the law officers, as a matter of fact.
As a matter of fact, the law officer sits around the cabinet table and is somebody who is consulted through that process.
Thank you. Now, the Common Rule Book is an EU rule book. The former president of the EFTA Court has just very recently, the last few days, stated that under it, and I quote, the UK would recognise that the ECJ is supreme on the interpretation of EU law, close quote, and under the independent arbitration system, we would agree to refer to the ECJ. The ECJ will determine not only the interpretation, but also the outcome of any disputes. Now, under the similar Ukraine, Georgia and Moldova treaties, the ECJ in practice decides, not the arbitrators. So given what the former president of the EFTA Court has so recently stated, and I think it's generally understood that he understands this stuff very well, how on earth could you argue that the white paper does discontinue ECJ jurisdiction, and how do you reconcile, as I asked you in the House the other day, the repeal of the 1972 Act with the continuing application of the functions of the European Court of Justice to the UK, when, as you know only too well, Section 3 of the European Community Act 1972 is the jurisdiction of the European Court over the UK in domestic law, and under the Repeal Act, that is actually going to be repealed on exit day.
We acknowledge in the white paper the role that the European Court of Justice has in being the determinant of the interpretation of European Union law. And that is acknowledged in the white paper. But we will not be under the jurisdiction of the European Court of Justice. Through the proposals that are in here, as we say, in those cases where there is a dispute which involves the interpretation of EU law, and in the industrial goods acquis, of course, there is a significant volume, a significant amount of case law already in existence in relation to the interpretation of those rules, many of which have been stable, have not changed for some time. Then it will be possible through those processes to ask for an opinion from the European Court of Justice on the interpretation of EU law. The European Court of Justice would not determine any dispute that takes place, that is in question at the time. The court of one party cannot be the arbiter in terms of a dispute between two parties. It would be, obviously we've got the if you like, the hierarchy of determinations of disputes that takes place. The European Court of Justice, by definition, as the arbiter of EU law, would have an influence, but it would have an influence in cases even when we had no deal with the European Union. Because if you were a business that was exporting to the European Union and doing so on the basis of EU rules, and there was a dispute, your importer, for example, raised a dispute about whether you had met those EU rules, the arbiter of that EU rule would be the European Court of Justice. In terms of disputes that are taken before the courts in the UK, they will go to the UK courts, they will be determined by the UK courts.
I understand that that is the direction, the trajectory of your answer, but I still leave on the table the questions I've asked, and I remain unconvinced at the moment, but we shall continue this one, no doubt, in due course.
I suspect, Sir William, you and I may have some further lengthy discussions on some of these legal issues.
Now,
thank you. I think we're going to have to move on to the next section. Thank you very much. So the next chair is Bernard Jenkins. Sir Bernard Jenkins, the chair of the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, Prime Minister.
Afternoon.
The White Paper talks about stepping up plans for no deal, and so far there appears to have been some reticence about making announcements about what is being prepared for in the event of no deal. So what's the basis for deciding when to announce what is being done in preparation for no deal?
Well, there are two approaches two aspects that we've looked at. The first is obviously the work that needs to be done by the government in determining the preparations, and then the second is the point at which it is important to be able to ensure that others outside government who would need to be involved are able to have the information that they need. I was going to look. We're not yet on the debate later. Technical notifications to set out what UK citizens and businesses need to do in a no-deal scenario. So making much more public awareness of the preparations. We imagine there are going to be around 70 of those technical notices that will be issued. So that's, if you like, taking a next step. The Cabinet did agree that we needed to step up our no-deal preparations, but this is part of those no-deal preparations, is making those technical notices available to those who obviously need to know that information.
Thank you. So if you've ruled out the option of negotiating an FTA with the European Union because they won't negotiate with us on the basis of without the backstop. They won't countenance an FTA without the backstop. That's correct, isn't it?
Well, yes, if I may but this is where language is important. If we talk about a free trade agreement, then the European Union has a single concept of what a free trade agreement is. Mm-hmm. So it's like Canada, that's a free trade agreement. What we're talking about in here is a much wider and more ambitious overall partnership with them. Mm-hmm. So obviously at its heart is a free trade area with the EU. But that's why we don't use the term free trade agreement. But you're right, the two options that were on the table from the EU were on the one hand EEA plus free movement, customs union, and which I think would not reflect the vote. And on the other was a free trade agreement that actually was less good than the Canadian free trade agreement, but with effectively the border down the Irish Sea.
One of the reasons you've given for not going for a Canada plus free trade agreement is that they won't negotiate with us on the basis of Northern Ireland remaining in the same customs area as the rest of the United Kingdom. They won't do that, will they?
Their proposal was for a free trade agreement which actually split Northern Ireland off from Great Britain.
So if we have a WTO Brexit, with or without an agreement, a withdrawal agreement, can you give us an assurance that it will be on the basis of a WTO Brexit that is for the whole of the United Kingdom, and there is no question of splitting Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom under those circumstances?
Well, I have been, I've said on many, many occasions that one of the targets, one of the aims that I have in relation to the negotiations that we have is to ensure that we retain the United Kingdom together. I believe that is important. I believe our union is very precious. So I will certainly be working to ensure that we are able to maintain, keep the United Kingdom together. As I said in response to the earlier questions,
that's fine.
In a no-deal scenario, of course, we will have to consider what action we take. Others will have to consider what action they take.
The no-deal planning, or the WTO Brexit planning, is planning for an invisible frontier in Northern Ireland.
The planning that is taking place at the moment, the issue of what happens in relation to that is an element that we have to be looking at as we're undertaking the no-deal planning. Yes. The preparatory work that is being undertaken across a whole range of departments and a whole range of ways.
Simple, Prime Minister.
But we have, I'm being careful in answering. Because I've already answered a question like this, and I don't want there to be any misunderstanding between the answers that I'm giving to the same question.
But is the government planning for a no-frontier, invisible customs frontier in Northern Ireland? Because you have to. That's part of the no-deal planning.
As we look at the no-deal planning, one of the issues that we have to look at
not quite a yes,
is one of the elements that we are looking at as part of our no-deal planning is that whole question of the border in Northern Ireland.
Okay, I don't think we're going to get any further on that one. And for matters such as the regulation of chemicals, aviation safety, food safety, and indeed medicines, which the House of Commons voted on yesterday, presumably no-deal planning includes draft legislation in order to provide for regulation of those products in our own market. And when are we going to see that legislation?
No-deal planning does involve looking at the any legislative requirements that are needed for these points. There is, I don't have a timetable for that. Required legislation at the moment. We have already put through some legislation that is relevant in a no-deal scenario in terms of our preparations for leaving the EU. But there is work that is undertaken, for example, in the relation to EASA, in terms of ensuring you would be looking, for example, there at probably a set of bilateral agreements. And the Department of Transport is looking at that.
But I mean, we will have to probably use the provisions under the EU Withdrawal Act. And we'll have to have regulations under that Act in order to replace those functions. And let's hope that they give us those bilateral agreements, because it would be very destructive and vindictive if they did not. But when do you think we will see those draft regulations or draft acts of Parliament, draft bills?
Well, there are some of the look. There's going to be a whole range of there'll be a whole range of primary and secondary legislation that will be being brought forward over time, obviously. There are a number of, as I said, we've already passed, obviously, the Withdrawal Act, the Nuclear Safeguards Bill, the Sanctions Bill. We're expecting to lay approximately 40 EU exit SIs before recess. The work is ongoing. There is a significant number of SIs that need to be laid in all of these areas.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
Thank you. We come on to the Transport Committee now, and Lillian Greenwood.
Thank you. Prime Minister, I'm sure that, like many people, you're looking forward to jetting off on holiday. We even understand you were quite keen to get away early. Obviously, one of the things happens is that people, when they come back from their holidays, they want to book their flights for next year. And at the moment, that's looking very uncertain. Last autumn, the Secretary of State was confident that the government would have made clear progress on aviation. We've yet to see anything concrete. How close are we to having the necessary post-Brexit aviation arrangements in place to retain access to the EU's single aviation market?
Well, as we've set out in the White Paper, we want to, as part of the future relationship, explore options that would enable the UK to continue to participate in EASA as a non-EU member state. We're moving at pace in terms of negotiations, as I've said, in relation to the future framework, because we want that to be sufficiently complete by the autumn of this year. Not legal text, obviously full legal text to follow thereafter. We believe that what is in this white paper is the right package we can put forward. As I've said, what the Department of Transport are also doing are looking at what would happen in a no-deal scenario and what arrangements would need to be placed in a no-deal scenario in order to ensure
so look, I mean,
that planes can keep
grounded
flying.
planes are in no one's interest.
No,
we were told
exactly.
they're very unlikely. So you've said now potentially autumn, and I know, does autumn mean September? Does it mean October? Does it mean November? Does it mean December? What's holding up progress on a deal on this vital area?
Oh, it's going to be part of the future relationship. The future relationship has been put, which we published in the white paper, has been put to the European Union. We've started having discussions with the European Union on the basis of that future relationship. The timetable that everybody is working to is to have that future relationship agreed in sufficient detail by October, such that when this Parliament looks at withdrawal agreement and implementation bill, it will know what the details of the future relationship will be. That's the timetable that we're working to.
So when the Secretary of State confirmed that the aviation industry would need comfort that we're making progress by next summer, last October, he told us that. When it was this summer, well, we're well into summer. Shouldn't we have had some of those things nailed down by now?
Well, as I say, the Department of Transport is working with the aviation industry to ensure that the necessary arrangements will be in place. We have made a specific proposal in here about EASA and participation in EASA as part of the future relationship, and that future relationship is being negotiated as I said, with that timetable that was set of October. It is as you say, it's in everybody's interest to ensure that the planes can still fly. I think that's not just in our interest, it's in the interests of others
so
in the EU 27.
Progress by summer, and now you're saying that's slipped to the autumn.
No, I'm not saying that that progress has slipped to the autumn. I'm saying this is an ongoing negotiation in a variety of levels. The future relationship is being negotiated with the European Commission with a view to that agreement by October. The Department of Transport have also been discussing with a number of countries the arrangements that could be put in place if there is no agreement on a multilateral basis with the United Kingdom for those proposals, to ensure that whatever the outcome is, that the planes can still fly.
So are we in negotiations on bilateral agreements with each of the 27 EU countries, in addition to other international bodies?
We're in discussion where it is necessary to be in discussion to ensure that if there is no deal, this is part of no deal preparations, that the planes can fly. But if there is, what we're proposing here is an arrangement that would enable that to continue to happen in the circumstances in which we have a deal, as part of the deal. Alongside that, I mean, it's not just the Department of Transport, obviously the Civil Aviation Authority is also working with the aviation sector. It's making the preparations that are necessary for it. Obviously, we propose participation in EASA, but it's also making the preparations necessary were it to be the case that it had to operate outside EASA.
Okay, why hasn't the government got on and struck a good aviation deal with the US, with some concessions if necessary, to leverage progress with the EU and provide some certainty to the airline industry and passengers? Are there sticking points in negotiations with the United States? And if so, what's holding up progress on the deal with the US on open skies?
We've had a number of rounds of negotiations with the United States on this issue. We're confident that we will be reaching an agreement with them.
And when are we expecting? Wouldn't it have been good to have got that deal in place in order to put more pressure on the EU to reach agreement about the UK-EU arrangements?
We will conduct the negotiations and put the arrangements in place when they need to be put in place.
So does that mean that people, when they come back from their holiday, perhaps in a few weeks' time, they're going to be buying flights, or they might be thinking about booking next year's holiday, and they really don't know whether those flights will operate or not, whether there'll be any arrangement in place to give them the certainty about booking their holiday?
Well, there are, as you will recall, first of all, we do look at what is going to be in place post-March 2019, but of course we also have an implementation period up to the end of December 2020. And we are looking to the relationship that will be in place at the end of that implementation period. Some things could be put in place at an earlier stage within that implementation period. The Department of Transport is working with the aviation sector, with governments within and outside the European Union, and also, as we've put forward, this is for a negotiation with the EU 27 collectively, We think that's the right way forward with the deal, but we are making the preparations necessary to ensure that whatever the circumstances, whatever happens in terms of the outcome of the negotiations, we still have those arrangements for planes to fly.
So book your flight at your own risk, I think. Thank you.
Very concerning. Thank you. Moving on now to the Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, and Neil Parish.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman, and good afternoon, Prime Minister. I think the answer is to come to the West Country to holiday and not worry about the flights. There must be times when you feel that you're damned if you negotiate with the EU and you're damned if you don't. And so I actually very much welcome your decision at Chequers and the Cabinet and the White Paper on agri-food, because I think rules need to be dealt with. We've got 30% of our manufacturing industry in this country is food and drink. Much of that food is grown here and under very good welfare conditions and environmental conditions. Also, the Northern Ireland border, I think, is and the Republic, much of the trade between the two is food, and it's perishable, and it crosses the border several times. But my actual question to you is on fishing, and that is, at the moment the fishing industry it contributes 1.3 billion to the economy, 34,000 jobs, and 708,000 tonnes of fish are caught, and we do process a lot of that. So to our coastal communities and fishermen, it's very important. But the issue is that as we leave the EU and we become an independent coastal state, at the moment they take something like 6 times the amount of fish from our waters as we take from theirs. And so it's an ace card, if you like, in our pack as we negotiate. Now, our fishermen want to make sure they get their fish back. And what they want to hear, very clearly from you, is that as we do this negotiation, they're not going to have their fish negotiated away, because we can not only get that fish back, but we can also actually build up our coastal communities, our processing, and it can be a really positive step from leaving the European Union. So, this is the reassurance I seek.
Well, first point, we will be out of the common fisheries policy, and
yes.
we will come out of the common fisheries policy, and we will be acting as an independent coastal state.
Yes.
Of course, there are issues about actually fishing, and then there's the
yes.
question of fishing products and the access to markets in relation to fishing products. But in terms of the access to waters that our fishermen would have, I mean, we want to be sitting there as an independent coastal state, able to make, obviously, as you'll be aware, there are annual negotiations.
Yeah.
Not just, obviously there's the EU structure within the common fisheries policy, but more generally annual negotiations about access to waters, and we will be part of that as an independent state. And we are very careful at the way in which fishing has been approached in the White Paper, so that it is separate from the question of that other elements of the economic partnership, precisely because I recognise the concern that the fishing industry had in the UK when we went into the European
That's right.
EEC,
there's no doubt that the fishing industry lost out dramatically. I think it's just that fishermen are bound to be slightly worried that it's tempting when you're sitting down round the negotiating table. There's some sticking points on other issues on trade that you start to negotiate away some of that extra fish. And I accept that it may take 1 or 2 years to get there, but the fishermen want to be absolutely certain they're going to get their fish back and it's not going to get traded away.
No, we are going to be ensuring that the control of our natural resources is distinct from the negotiation of the future economic partnership.
So the fishermen can be assured that they're going to get their fish back.
Separate negotiation. It'll be a separate negotiation. It'll be a separate part of the agreement.
Right. So therefore, it's not going to be a bargaining tool. You can say that quite clearly as we negotiate out of the EU, because the EU want greater access to our fish because they've got it at the moment. So they're bound to try and play hardball on it.
We want this will be a separate agreement, a separate part of the negotiations that we're undertaking with them. This is not going to be jumbled in with the other elements of the trade relationship in the way that it was in the past.
So fishermen can rest easy in their beds.
We want to ensure that, as you say, we not only restore the independence of the UK in terms of determining access to its waters, but we also have the opportunity, as you say, to see our fishing communities being built up and the benefits that that will bring.
And of course, the very final question is that as we get those fishing rights back and that fish back, of course, the quid pro quo is a lot of that is traded into the European Union. So therefore, the deal on making sure the agri-food market works on an extremely perishable product is even more important.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just before we move on to the next section on air quality, can I just ask you a further point about contingency planning? Because you've mentioned in an earlier answer to Sir Bernard that you'll be issuing technical notices in August and September to those who need to know. What about the wider public? What sort of information will you be giving the wider public about all the different contingencies you're planning for in the event of no deal? And the costs that would be involved in that? Will you be very clear and transparent with everybody about the range of areas where you will be making preparations and making that information available to the public?
Well, I think we will be making more information available generally about the preparations that are being made. The technical notices are obviously very specific to those who need to consider how they personally or their business is preparing for the potential circumstance of no deal. By making those available, I mean, obviously that will be part of in making more information available more generally on the preparations that are taking place.
But as Lillian Greenwood has pointed out, there are very many wide-ranging areas in which no deal would not be better than a bad deal, where there could be very significant impacts on individuals. Will you be setting those out so that the public can see what the potential implications could be? I mean, we've for example, on the Health Committee looked at very many implications. For example, if we don't have access to the European health insurance card after we leave the European Union in the event of no deal whatsoever, it would effectively mean that people with long-term health conditions would be uninsurable to travel to the European Union. Are these the kinds of areas that you'll be laying out to people?
Well, I think if I may, there's an issue here where we're looking to negotiate a deal and negotiate that by October. So, and at that point, of course, the question will come to Parliament as to we have the meaningful vote. We then have the potential waive, the withdrawal agreement and implementation bill. At the point at which it is, and at that point, with a deal and an agreed deal, then obviously it will become clear to people what the future relationship is going to be and the basis of that future relationship. I think if you're asking me to say, are we going to say to people here and now, if there is no deal, you will not be able to do A, B and C. I mean, what preparedness for no deal is about is making sure that government, that business, that those who have to take actions to prepare for no deal are able to do that, and do that in a timely way, because some of these may be actions which would take time to put into place.
That's right, but it's also about letting the public know well in advance what the kinds of issues will be arising for every government department and for them in their everyday lives as well.
Well, I think there's, at the point, if it were to be the case, we're working for a deal. We're working for a good deal.
We all appreciate that.
If it were to be the case that we were to be in a no-deal scenario, then obviously the information that it would be necessary for the public to have would be made available to them.
But the point is that it looks as if we're getting closer towards the possibility of no deal. Everyone appreciates that you would like to achieve a good deal. We all realise that. But this is about setting out very clearly what the consequences of no deal would be, what the planning necessary for that would be, and what the potential costs would be, so that that's very clear to the public.
Well, you based your question on an assumption that said that we were getting closer to a no-deal scenario. I don't believe that is the case. We have put forward a proposal for what the future relationship should be. We believe the future relationship should be with the European Union, and we're in negotiations on the basis of that. The timetable that I've set out in answer to other questions still remains in relation to working to having sufficient detail of this for agreed by October.
Okay, so I accept you don't see accept the premise of my question, but there is still that growing possibility. I feel that we could end up with a no-deal scenario. And my question was, will you be laying out for the public what the consequences of that will be very clearly.
Well, if we are in a no-deal scenario, then we will lay out the consequences for the public. What we are doing at the moment is working for a deal.
Yes,
where
no,
the
I
government's,
appreciate that, but
what we're doing is working for a deal.
Yes.
And that is the basis on which the Chequers Agreement was made, that's the basis on which the White Paper is made, it's the basis on which we've started discussions with the European Union. So at this point, what we're doing is saying we will ensure, as we step up our no-deal preparations, we will ensure that those technical notices are issued over August and September, so that those who need to have that information have that information.
You've made that clear. Prime Minister, can I just say...
I think what you're asking me to do is to do something else, which is to set out the argument for no deal versus the argument for a deal, rather than actually saying we're working for a deal.
No, I'm asking
we'll make sure that
Prime
those
Minister,
who
with
know...
respect, that's not... I'm asking you to set out for the public, because I think sometimes the public don't realise the scale of the issues that we would be facing, and the costs and the absolute necessity that we start planning now, because time is getting so short. So that's, I guess, my request to you is, will you agree to publish this so that the public can see what the consequences are and what you're planning for?
What we will be doing is ensuring that more information is available on the preparations the government is making for no deal, that we publish the technical notices, so that those who need to make the preparations for no deal are able to do so.
You've made that clear, Prime Minister. My concern was for the wider public understanding what the consequences are. But anyway, we're going to move on now to an entirely different subject, and that is air quality, and opening the questioning. Yourself, is it Lillian?
Yeah.
Lillian Greenwood.
Prime Minister, I'm sure you know our 4 committees produced a report which called for a joined-up approach from government on air quality, including improving public transport and incentives to reduce the need for private vehicle use. Now, your government has a policy on modal shift.
Just after 4 o'clock, what we're seeing on your screen is the Prime Minister answering questions from the liaison committee. This tends to happen during every parliamentary session, questions from the chairman of the various select committees. Mrs May's come under quite a lot of scrutiny. Interesting that she says she does not believe that the UK is moving closer to a no-deal Brexit. Earlier she was being questioned in detail about how her proposed customs arrangements would work, and really struggled to give specific answers, as she did there, on the whole question of the European health card. So Brexit continues to put pressure on the Prime Minister, and as if to underline that, while she's been speaking to MPs in a committee room, Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, delivered a personal resignation speech in which he said that the dream of a Brexit was being lost, in which he said what was proposed at Chequers was Brexit in name only, and in which he urged the Prime Minister to return to the principles which he said she laid out in her Lancaster House speech at the beginning of last year.
It is not too late to save Brexit. We have time in these negotiations. We have changed tack once, and we can change again. The problem is not that we failed to make the case for a free trade agreement of the kind spelt out at Lancaster House. We haven't even tried. We must try now, because we will not get another chance to get it right.
Well, monitoring the latest Brexit developments is our senior political correspondent, Jason Farrell. Jason, let's start with that resignation speech from Boris Johnson. Was it a Sir Geoffrey Howe speech, an all-out assault on the Prime Minister's leadership, or not?
Well, it wasn't quite an all-out assault on Theresa May. He praised her for her courage and resilience, but it was an assault on her policy, and I also think an attack on the way that in which she has conducted these negotiations. So not just saying that she's going in the wrong direction, but pretty much also criticising the backstory to these negotiations, in particular where he talked about a fog of self-doubt, and he said that we have burned up... burned our way through our negotiating capital with 18 months of stealthy retreat. And he compared the Lancaster House speech to the Chequers agreement, and really made three key comparisons. Firstly, about the common rule book with the Chequers agreement, and how at the Lancaster House speech she talked about creating our own rules, then talked about voting on rules, the ability for Parliament to have a say on rules, and saying that now we would become rule takers. And then in the Lancaster House speech, specifically picking on the comments she said about not being half in or half out. He said now, of course, we would be in lockstep with the European Union on our rules over goods and agri-foods. So it was a complete attack on Theresa May. I didn't think it had as much metaphor as Geoffrey Howe did with that famous cricket bat suggestion that we were going into bat with broken bats, as you might expect from Boris Johnson. And it wasn't striking a killer blow saying that she should stand down, but it was saying there was time to change tack. And clearly a suggestion from Boris Johnson there that he felt he could do a better job in this negotiation than Theresa May could.
He did evoke the Thatcherite free market reforms of the 1980s, and he said they wouldn't be possible. On the other hand, those were carried out when Britain was a member of the European community. So what's his point there?
Well, I think the point he is making is that this is a backtrack on the idea of free markets around the world and free trading around the world. That he doesn't believe Theresa May when she says that there will be this ability to strike our own free trade deals outside of the European Union. He says there will be giving away too much capital with this agreement on goods and agri-foods, and that the idea that he put forward, of course, during the referendum campaign, that Britain would strike it out and become this independent nation, that had effectively died over the last 18 months of these negotiations.
What about the reception for the speech? I have to say, just here in the Commons, I don't get the impression that this resignation speech has really electrified the political debate today. Would that be fair?
Well, it was weird. It was. I mean, it wasn't. There was obviously a buffer put between Theresa May giving her having the Prime Minister's questions. They had the various urgent questions in the Commons between Theresa May and Boris Johnson. Then, of course, when he got up to stand to make his speech, Theresa May was nowhere in the House. In fact, she was sitting down, ready to take those questions that we've been watching from the liaison committee. But he did have a kind of buffer of the key kind of Brexiteers around him, the big supporters. I noticed David Davis sat directly behind him, and you could see that he had surrounded himself by a fair number of backers, if you like, the kind of people who you might expect to come out in support of him if he did ever stand for a leadership. But no, it wasn't a rousing, bring down the House speech, I didn't feel, from Boris Johnson. But I'm not sure, it didn't seem that exactly that he was aiming for it. He was putting down a marker, effectively saying that, you know, this is the way it's got to go. If it doesn't go that way, then we're not putting forward the Brexit that the public have asked for, and in particular the Conservative Party membership, who he has been polling himself to see how popular he is amongst the Conservative membership, and apparently finding that he's more popular than perhaps people would expect. And there is that sense that he is sending out that message to the Conservative heartlands that he is ready to step in if he gets the feeling that is what is wanted.
Of course, it's a very busy day for the Prime Minister. She's giving that evidence session now, having to hear about Boris Johnson, and then she's going to go on and meet her own MPs behind closed doors at the 1922 committee here in the Palace of Westminster. And she's already done a session of Prime Minister's questions, where it has to be said some of the toughest questions came from her own side, the Conservative benches.
I'm going to go